Hello everybody.
Hello. Great. So we're going to hand straight over to you, Dr. Asha, and welcome.
So I'm just going to share my screen so you can see the slides. Can you see the slides okay?
Yep.
Yep. Okay, perfect. I've got till 1:15, is that? 1:45 I've got till, is that okay? 12:45?
Yes, absolutely perfect.
Perfect. So, hello everybody. Sorry I can't be with you in person. Today I'm going to be focused on thinking about how we can support children's mental health and wellbeing, particularly when they've been exposed to violence and abuse within a family setting. Just to give you a little bit of background, I'm Dr. Asha Patel. I'm a clinical psychologist and founder of Innovating Minds. And prior to founding Innovating Minds about 10 years ago, I used to work in forensic mental health services. So I've worked in settings that have typically been with high-profile murderers, sex offenders, individuals that had got really complex mental health difficulties, but also committed really serious offending behaviour. And I've worked across the lifespan, and I guess my frustration of thinking that I'm working at the wrong end of the spectrum led to Innovating Minds. A lot of the individuals that I was supporting and risk assessing as to how many people might need to be handcuffed to support staff to be able to access the community, or how do we support that reintegration into the community. A lot of these individuals had experienced trauma in their childhood and were not able to access the support that they needed at the time. And therefore, there was now in a situation where there's institutionalised and accessing lots of amazing specialist support, but it felt like it'd been too late. So what we do at Innovating Minds is upskill the frontline practitioners, people like yourselves that are working with children and families on a day-to-day basis to be able to provide that support, that early trauma-informed help. Now, it's really important that we look at it from a lens of being trauma-informed, because actually that's where the biggest difference can be made. With all the research and the neuroscience and things that we know now can actually shape how we can support children and young people. So just to a caveat, we will be talking about some really difficult information. Presentation is really mindful of we're not trying to traumatise yourselves through accessing training either. But if at any point in the session you do feel uncomfortable, your body doesn't feel safe, do take that time for yourself as well. Now, there's actually been a big focus on supporting adults affected by violence, affected by domestic abuse. But what we've come to recognise and what we now know is actually some of the biggest victims of domestic abuse, domestic violence, are actually the smallest ones and often the most forgotten. So often services, whether it's supported refuge, whether it's the local, whether it's through social services, the focus has always been on the adult and typically the safe parent. And the thinking behind that is, well, if we support safe parent, then actually they're in a better place to support their child. But actually children have their own experiences and have their own journey of recovery and healing. And what sometimes can get misunderstood is that safe parent might think that, well, actually they was asleep, they wasn't present when the abuse was taking place. And what we now know is children are not witnesses of domestic abuse and violence. They are victims of it, and they are victims in their own right. The impact that we know violence and domestic abuse can have on children is really significant. So what we know from the ACEs study, the Adverse Childhood Experiences study, is children that have experienced adversities in their childhood, such as like domestic abuse, poverty, faced with parents with addiction, actually have a significant increased likelihood of developing physical health difficulties, so things like irritable bowel syndrome, cardiovascular diseases, but also have a significant increased likelihood of experiencing mental health difficulties. We can reverse that effect by us being able to provide support. So if that child has access to one safe, grounded adult, one person that they can connect with, we can reduce the likelihood of them developing later difficulties in childhood, whether it's physical or emotional mental health difficulties, quite significantly. Now that's really powerful, because often what we're looking for is a magic wand, or we think, well, there's not enough resource, there's not enough financial resource, there's not enough manpower to be able to offer all the support for the children. But actually what's important to remember is that you are the biggest resource. How you approach children, the language that you use, how you connect with people, how you're aware of your own kind of emotional regulation and how you're feeling, that will have an impact on the children that you're working with, or actually just on a day-to-day basis seeing. Now, one thing for us to think about is actually often people feel that, well, when the child is no longer living with the adult that's harming, that, well, things should get better. And this is not really the case. So does domestic abuse, does violence ever finish? Well, in a sense, not really, because we know the trauma is stored in the child's body. And by asking the children to talk about their experiences doesn't necessarily mean that they're processing that trauma. And actually what we're asking to do is asking them to keep reliving the trauma that they've been exposed to by asking them to relive it. Now, if you think, well, that's coming from a psychologist who's trained in talking therapies, then you kind of think, well, what is the point of therapy? And it's really important to make sure that we understand the impact that domestic abuse and violence is having on children, and particularly at different journeys of their journey of recovery and healing. So if they're coming into refuge, for example, or they've been moved, or they've had to relocate, or in different school maybe, all these things now feeling really difficult for them, on top of the ongoing trauma that their body has experienced. They may miss the adult that harms. They may miss things like having access to resources like money and gifts, or being able to, or not life feeling so difficult now that they're no longer living with the adult that harms. They might have feelings that are coming up, but they've got no way to express them. So there might be feelings of anger towards a safe parent. It might be that they miss certain things within the previous home and life that they lived in. And also you have to really think about siblings as well. Just because siblings have grown up in the same household, in the same environment, it doesn't mean that their experiences of violence and abuse is going to be the same. What we actually know is siblings have a very different experience, and that might be because of the adult that harms might be treating them very differently. So often some children might be love bombed, so there might be a child that is love bombed, they're given lots of gifts, they're favouritised by the adult that harms, and there might be another child that is actually maybe neglected, or the parent that harms doesn't have the same relationship with that young person. Also, what we know is children can be often used as another way to harm the safe parent as well. So things like contact arrangements, court proceedings that will be taking place, their experiences of going through maybe social care and experience of professionals being in their life might be really difficult. If you imagine you've got professionals coming in and out of your home, professionals that may be at risk of removing children from their home, or the safe parent feeling like they're not doing a good enough job, because often it's the safe parent that a lot of pressure is put under, and actually safe parent being told that they're not doing a good enough job in terms of parenting or being able to keep their children safe, because they're also going on that journey of healing and recovery as well. Now, what do we know about the impact of domestic abuse? So often we think around domestic abuse having cognitive impact, so that they're reliving the experience of abuse that they've had. But what we know is actually trauma memories are stored as sensory memories, and they impact our nervous system. So memories of trauma are not necessarily stored in our brain as thoughts and memories, which is often what we always go to. We always think, well, if we change how we think, that'll change how we feel, and it'll change how we behave. Well, actually what we know around trauma is actually stored in our senses, and it actually makes sense because your body is the biggest part compared to your brain. So your body is constantly scanning for information, and it's using all of your senses, so the touch, the hearing, the smell, to be able to sense for danger. And that's our body's kind of way to keep us alive. So it's there for a purpose, to keep us alive. When children have experienced adversity, such as domestic abuse and violence, their bodies are remembering that information of how it felt. So if you do have somebody, for example, you're working with a young person and you stand really close behind them, or you step behind them without letting them know, the body will be really heightened and sense and kind of really on hypervigilance, thinking that actually something is going to happen to them. So they might flinch, they might scream out, they might kind of lash out at you, and you might think, well, I've not done anything. So we really have to think about the behaviour responses in this manner of thinking actually the behaviour that they're communicating is their way of signifying either that they need help or they're trying to protect themselves and keep themselves safe. And then bearing in mind in their experiences, they've had to find coping strategies, ways of getting through this trauma. And they're using the resources that they have in that moment to be able to do that. Now, why we focus so much on the body instead of the brain is because the information that the body is feeling, and this will apply to you as adults on a day-to-day basis. If your body is feeling unsafe, so if you're feeling quite anxious, if you're feeling quite panicky, your heart is racing, you've got butterflies, your body sends information to the brain to signalise that actually something's not right, I'm feeling unsafe. So what we need to do is be able to calm the body down to send signals back to the brain to say, actually, I'm okay, I'm fine. Now, when we think about our body, often we are used to taking notice of our body because we're so used to thinking about physical health, and we're quite comfortable with talking about feeling physically unwell. What we're not so good at is being able to translate that into our emotional mental health and well-being. So actually, if we get children to take notice of how their body is feeling, what we can start to do is help them to think about how we can then use their body to help to calm their body and help it feel safe and calm again. Now, there's things that will be happening in the body, so needing to go to the toilet quite frequently. If a young person has experienced an anxiety, it does affect those organs. It does affect the way that you do need to use the toilet. So you are feeling the need more frequently. Often adults might think, well, they're trying to get out of a session or trying to get out of the classroom, they're trying to get away with doing something or deflect something. But we do have to remember the impact trauma has on the physical health as well. So your body is actually the best resource. And you as the adults that'll be supporting the children and the families and thinking about how you set up your services also need to be thinking about, well, actually, do we as staff members, are we so awareness and mindful of our own body? Because actually how your body is feeling will translate to the interaction that you have with the children. So if you're feeling unsafe, unregulated, quite nervous, you're going to find it really difficult to co-regulate with children. The reason why we're looking to co-regulate with children is so that we can help that children's body and brain to feel safe and calm enough that they can have this interaction with you, an interaction that they've probably not had before or very little of, and that they can then open up and be able to learn and be able to have those experiences of feeling safe with an adult. Now, you can think about this in a really simple way, and this is a great way to think about how your body and brain works together. So if you think about, and I'm hoping you can see my hand quite clearly, if you think about your body and your brain as the hand-brain model. So this bottom part of your brain is your safety survival part, and everybody has this. And it's like the meerkat part of your brain. It's always scanning for danger. It's there to keep you safe. Then you've got the feeling memories part, which is your thumb. Now, this is the feeling memories part. So imagine you get an ice cream, you're really looking forward to it, and then you drop it. You're going to feel angry, annoyed, whatever those emotions are going to be. But the next time you get an ice cream, you're going to remember the one that you dropped. And then you've got your thinking part of the brain here. And this is all the stuff that helps us solve problems. It does the really high functioning stuff, so things like perspective taking into consideration other people's feelings, kind of weighing up the pros and cons of something. Should I say something right now? Should I not? What the impact is going to be. When you're feeling safe and calm, all three parts of the body, all three parts of the brain are working together. But when you're feeling unsafe and the safety survival response is in place, it flicks the thinking brain offline and safety survival mode is in place. So often what you hear as well, children, they're not responding, they're not listening to me, they're in a red mist, they're zoned out, they're telling me what I want to hear. That's because they're in safety survival response and the thinking part of the brain is no longer connected to the other parts of the brain. So that is really something important to remember, but also for yourselves, if you're constantly in and out of safety survival mode, you're not operating in a way either that's going to be conducive for the work that you're doing, but also supporting those people in your care. I'm going to move on to some strategies and come back to the video because I think the strategies is going to be what's going to be really helpful for you. Now, when we talked about the hand-brain model, a way to get the thinking brain to be switched online again is to work with the body. And the body is attached to the brain. And what we're doing is trying to work with the body to calm the body, to send information back up to the brain to say I'm safe and calm, then all three parts of the brain start to work together. Now for safety, babies, children, young people depend on adults. And actually if you think about it, as a baby, we're the only really kind of mammal that relies so heavily on an adult looking after us for such a long period of time. So it's wired into every baby that we need to connect to ensure safety and survival. And the quality and that reliability of that connection will affect them physiologically, emotionally, and psychologically. And the really important thing to think about here is that often when a parent is experiencing abuse, they've lived in a household of abuse, of domestic violence, whether it's coercive control, physical violence, all the different forms of abuse, if that safe parent is actually not able to provide that consistent support and that connection and being able to attune to their child because the abuse that they've been experiencing, that's going to have an impact on the children. And yes, we know it's in response to the perpetrator's behaviour. It's not the safe adults that's having this impact. It's the harmful behaviour, but whether or not, regardless, it's the children that are going to be affected. Children cannot escape the adults that are around them. They rely on the adults. They're actually a lot of what they do on a day-to-day basis and the decisions are made by the adults around them. And therefore they totally are dependent from a survival response to make sure that they adapt and try to protect themselves, but also to find ways of connection. Now, children adapt to what they cannot escape from. So you might see children that are behaving in certain ways that we find challenging. And often you hear it as that child is lashing out, they're challenging, they're displaying challenging behaviour, they're being difficult. But actually it's us as adults that find their behaviour as being difficult. We can often think that a child is doing it on purpose or they're behaving in this way to get attention. Now, if you start to hear those kind of phrases or we have these conversations, you think, well, a child is doing this to get attention. Whether we'd like to admit it or not, we all require attention. We all need attention. It's hardwired into us for connection with other people. So what we want to do is think about their behaviour, their responses, as actually protective behaviours and responses to keep themselves safe, but also it's help-seeking, it's connection-seeking responses. If we change that language, and really important for you to be able to think about the language that you use, that's in your policies and procedures, the language you use with families and young people, if you change that language of actually, is this young person connection seeking, are they help seeking, that has a massive impact on the response staff give. Because ultimately, when we feel that somebody's attention seeking, we feel quite negative about it. We don't actually go in with compassion and empathy and kind of think about actually what's happening to that young person, what's happened to that individual for them to be displaying behaviours in this way. Now, we want to keep it really simple when we offer help. And the reason why we do this is we want our children, families, babies, young people to be able to access a positive help-seeking experience. Because how you offer help now in this moment will determine how they go on to access future help. Now, it starts with you, and it's not about doing something different to the children and young people and the adults and thinking, well, it doesn't apply to us. So if you're going to implement this approach, this trauma-informed approach, it has to come from a system level as you as an organisation, the way that you treat your team, the members around you, but also then how you then go on to support other people. So it starts with you being able to ground yourself. And to be able to ground yourself, you have to have some awareness of your own sense. So how does your body feel? How is it that your tone of voice comes across? Your facial expressions, thinking about the clothing that you wear and the sense. Because if you remember, trauma is stored as sensory memories. If you're wearing red a lot of the time, when our families have experienced violence and often may have seen blood, actually that colour of red might be re-traumatising and might trigger an individual to go into safety survival mode. So how do you become more self-aware? How do you create a culture that allows people to reflect upon their own practice without feeling that they're being blamed or they're not good at their job? How do you prevent re-traumatisation taking place? Constantly, our body is scanning for cues of danger, cues of safety. So how can we keep offering cues of safety to children and families? And that can also be done in the physical environment as well. So how do you create really calm, safe physical spaces, as well as how do you prevent re-traumatisation taking place in your work? Talk less. Often we're uncomfortable with these uncomfortable silences. We go into wanting to fix it, problem solve things for individuals. Have you tried this? Well, let's do this. Let's signpost you to this place. Actually, a lot of people want you to be with them. The young people, they want you to listen. So you need to get comfortable with those uncomfortable silences and not jumping into wanting to fix things straight away. Now, we talk about the breath. The reason why we talk about the breath is because actually when we take in information and send it down to our body, what it does is supports the vagus nerve, and it helps to calm and soothe your own vagus nerve, which can help you as a response to feel more safe and regulated. So there's some things that actually before you go and interact with somebody and you kind of might be running on a day-to-day basis, there might be some members of staff that are kind of firefighting. How do you manage that response in yourself to be able to provide that regulation? Now, repetition, you've got to get comfortable with. Often it's us as adults that find it really difficult to keep repeating ourselves. But if you think about the children and the families that you're working with, they've experienced trauma. So therefore, they're going to find it cognitively quite difficult to process information that you're giving to them. So actually repetition, keeping things quite simple, keeping things worded really easily in a nice way, not lots of don't do this in your kind of bathrooms and posters that are scaring people. It's actually thinking about how you use your language and how you use repetition to support individuals access information. Now, also being quite aware and sensitive to what's being taught. If you're talking to children and young people and families about healthy relationships, for example, often you see that children are exposed to this in schools, but they're living in a household that have experienced violence, domestic abuse, unhealthy relationships. Imagine the impact that has, that they're now sat in this space, expected to access this information and not being able to express that actually they're already living in it. It's no good talking about what a healthy relationship is when they're actually living in unhealthy relationships. And things like addiction, there might be parents and carers that they're being cared for by people that have addiction, whether it's alcohol addiction, gambling, illicit substances. When we engage with parents and carers, we're also thinking it in a non-judgmental way, thinking about actually, it's not about their parenting, we're not trying to teach you how to parent. If we can pass this information on about their own body response and how they can be able to be regulating so they can support their children, that does it in a way that actually doesn't talk about them being a bad parent or not able to support their children. Now, we talked about physical space. Now, the physical space is really important. So if you look around you now within your room, I can see that some chairs don't have arms, and therefore some people will be sitting cross-legged and crossed-armed. And often chairs with arms, people feel more comfortable in because it holds you as a body. Don't feel like you need to change your position, by the way. It's just to give you an idea. So in your waiting areas, in your physical spaces, having chairs with arms helps to hold the body. It helps the body to feel safe. Also things around smells and the noise and the locations, access to doors, do people know, can people be signposted quite easily? So really looking at your physical environment through a trauma-informed lens. You might have set it up in a way thinking this looks really homely, this is really supportive, children want everything new, families want everything new. But imagine if you're not used to that, living in that way. And that can start to feel really uncomfortable for children and families. So it's really good to get insights from the children and families. Now, what I would say is you're never going to know everybody's trigger, and you're never going to eradicate everybody's trigger for traumatisation taking place. But what we can do is try and minimise that risk from taking place. Now, to finish up on is the impact of vicarious trauma. And the reason why I always bring this up, because often we focus so much on the children and families and the effects of domestic abuse and violence on the people that we care for, we often forget about the staff members that are supporting these. Now, vicarious trauma is real, and everybody is at risk of experiencing vicarious trauma. And that is because they'll have empathic relationships with people that they're caring for. They will be exposed to trauma. They will be seeing things, hearing things, feeling things that are all trauma related because of the nature of the work that they do. And because they care, indirectly they're going to be exposed to that trauma, and if they don't process that trauma, what typically happens, it gets processed through their body. So you get staff going off on sickness and absence, but also when they book annual leave, what you find, and typically what you might find, is that you're ill for the first 2 or 3 days. Unexplained aches and pains, colds start kicking in, and that is trauma being processed through the body. Now, you might say, well, we've got employees assistance programs in place, and there's lots of support there. But actually, the idea is to enable your staff to be able to process the trauma that they've been exposed to on an ongoing basis, as opposed to waiting for it to manifest in physical or mental health difficulties. Now, if you've got staff that are working with you for a long time and they kind of might think, well, I've seen it all, I've heard it all before, actually they're probably the staff members that need the most support because they've been exposed to it for longer. And the fact that they might feel that they don't need that ongoing support can be quite worrying as well, because you might get compassion fatigue taking place. But really important to think about actually how do you support your team to be able to process the vicarious trauma that they've been exposed to. I'm just going to leave it there. I don't know if we've got time for questions or any reflections or any feedback. Time flies, doesn't it? Half an hour goes so quickly.
It goes very quickly. Has anybody got any reflections, questions? No.
Just a thank you.
Okay, well, Asha, thank you so much. That was really riveting, and we'll look forward to seeing you physically in the future.
Perfect. Thank you so much, and enjoy lunch. Thank you.